All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is John with Murder by the Book, coming to you with another live event here on YouTube. We're so excited tonight to have Tessa Arlen here with us to talk about her newest book, Poppy Redfern and the Fatal Flyers. And we're so excited that we get to chat with Anna Lee Huber again. Her most recent release was A Pretty Deceit, and then she also had an anthology called The Deadly Hours that came out a little bit earlier this year, and she has graciously agreed to chat with Tessa about the new book. So I'm going to get them introduced before we get started. So Tessa Arlen was born in Singapore, the daughter of a British diplomat. She's lived in Egypt, Germany, the Persian Gulf, China, and India. An Englishwoman married to an American, Tessa lives on the West Coast with her family and two corgis. How are you tonight, Tessa?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. I'm so glad I actually get to meet you virtually, because I know when you came to the store for the first book, I don't think that I was there that night. So it's actually nice to meet you kind of as face-to-face as we can right now. And as I mentioned, we're so excited to have Anna Lee Huber with us. One of the fun things about the pandemic is that we get to chat with people more than we usually would. So this is, I think, the third time we've been able to chat with Anna in the last couple of months. And so she is the Daphne Award-winning author of the national best-selling Lady Darby Mysteries and the Verity Kent Mysteries. She is a summa cum laude graduate of Lipscomb University in Nashville, Tennessee, where she majored in music and minored in psychology. She currently resides in Indiana with her family and is hard at work on her next novel. How are you tonight, Anna?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing well. Thanks again for doing this for us.
Yes.
So if you guys are watching on YouTube, if you have any questions for Anna or Tessa, you can drop those in the comments. I am going to turn off my video and let them chat for a little bit. I'll be interacting with you guys on YouTube, and then in a little bit, I will pop back in and relay any of those questions that you have. So y'all have a nice chat, and I will see you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
So Tessa, I was super excited to get to chat with you tonight because I just love Poppy and Griff, and this new series I adore it. And one of the things I love is you explore the war in like really fascinating and unique ways I've never seen done before. And you have such a depth, like, and a grasp for all those tiny nuances of the era. So it really draws you in. And I want to know, basically, what was the inspiration kind of behind the series? Like, how did you come to have such a depth of understanding about this era? I think I read somewhere your grandfather would share stories about things, and
my father, yeah.
I'd love to hear.
So that, two Oldianas, to be sure. And my grandfather, of course, would tell a story about anything, but my father really was a little bit too young for the Second World War. He was 18 and at Bletchley Park as a cipher clock when it came to a close, when it came
wow.
But his biggest passion was he was an RAF cadet whilst he was at school, and he and his cousin Dave would bike over to the local RAF airfield, and they would as cadets they would polish Spitfires to make them go faster. And he really was, he desperately wanted to be a pilot, and it didn't happen. So his stories about the war are definitely home front stories. They're not stories of daring do in Europe or North Africa. And my grandfather and he loved to cat one another's tails. And of the really daft things my dad did with his brother Dave. One afternoon, they lived in Greenwich Village, which is London, across the river from the London Dock area, which saw an awful lot of air raids, appalling during the Blitz. And they got up on the roof of their house one afternoon during an air raid with their jam sandwiches and watched a Messerschmitt and a Spitfire in a dogfight overhead. This was borne out by my grandfather, who said they were hauled off in through their bedroom window and given a thoroughly good thrashing, which they did in those days. They were always thrashing their kids. And they didn't see that they could possibly be in danger, but they said they could see the men inside the cockpit of those fighter planes. So, I grew up with all of that. And every Boxing Day, we would sit in front of the TV and watch Bridge Over the River Kwai or A Bridge Too Far or something. And my father he'd know all the history of it. And it kind of caught me, you know. And my last series ended with World War I, so it seemed really appropriate. Well, not even appropriate. I really wanted to write Homefront Britain. So I did. And I found myself hearing my dad's voice telling me, you know, how many bullseyes he could get a week from his sugar ration, from his, you know, from sweet shop. And it just really went from there.
That's fascinating. I love that. Your dad.
It's first-hand information. Absolutely accurate. No exaggeration.
So I know you always do an extensive amount of research on your books. Can you tell us a little bit about your research process for the Poppy series? You know, what particularly fascinating things did you learn that maybe you weren't expecting?
Well, the Atta girls, the air transport auxiliary volunteers, and they were volunteers, but they were paid. I read that one of these amazing old women had flown the Spitfire she had delivered at one time. And when her name was Margaret, and I'm so sorry, I tried to find out what her last name was. Anyway, this woman, Margaret, had scratched her name and the date on the inside of the Spitfire. And after the war, the Spitfire had gone through the war, it had survived. And a lot of them were built by wealthy people who were Spitfire enthusiasts. And this man had bought this plane and he saw her name in it and he contacted her. And she flew the plane again in her late 60s. And I saw that this remarkable old lady had died. And I thought, what were those women like? And it was amazingly easy to find out all about them. There's a heritage museum in Maidenhead that is completely dedicated to the ATA. And it's a mine, an absolute mine of information. And that's really where I went to get
That's wonderful.
to find out, you know, the difference between a Hurricane and a Spitfire and the different classes of plane. You had to have a license for each particular class.
Right.
These women were capable of flying planes, 35 different planes. And they could get in a plane that was similar to, but not quite the same as, and take off, flying it for the first time from the factory to the airfield in appalling weather, because you know England. Rely on the weather, and couldn't fly more than 1,000 feet, couldn't fly higher than 1,000 feet because they would have to find their way with maps and landmarks. So, I mean, what a bunch. And of course, they weren't allowed to fly in combat. So, because the RAF thought that it would be inappropriate for women to fly in combat. So this is what they did. So I mean, it was like I couldn't believe some of the stories I unearthed about, which I regurgitated in some form or another in the book, because some of the things that happened to them were incredible.
Yeah, I always find the stuff that's really true is crazier than anything you could have made up, and it makes the best fodder.
And I can't put that in because everybody will think I made it up. It's true. Yeah. I mean, I've heard that so often. Yeah. They were incredible. And the ones in the book are are based very loosely on the original 8 girls who were recruited, and they knew how to fly because they came from well-to-do families, and their dad or their uncle had maybe flown in the First World War, and they grew up flying. And it was a huge craze. I mean, between the wars, everybody had a little tiger moth that they would fly around in. And that also comes up in the book, is this rather privileged group. And then the other girls, because there were many, there were, God, I can't remember the number now, about 130 women flew. But they had a government training school. So then you got everybody. And it was still a job that, better than nursing, eh?
Especially if you like flying and like excitement and
yes. And you're not frightened of heights. I mean, I could never have done it because I hate flying, but they were remarkable, and it wasn't really glamorous. They did have long hours, and
oh yes,
it was.
Yeah, I love that you go into all that. I mean, you know, really get into the meat of what they were up against and who they were, and yeah.
Yeah, it was slog, I think, most of the time. The Ministry of Information, the Crown Film Unit, made them very glamorous, but it wasn't really a glamorous job.
Right. So, you know, you mentioned to me that a basic theme of the Fatal Flyers is women who work together doing a dangerous job, eating and sleeping and playing together, and particularly women who in the World War II years did a job that was thought only men could or should do. You know, why did you want to explore this subject? And why do you think the Atta girls are still so fascinating even today for us?
Because we're still, as a sex, working hard to be recognized for the amazing things we are.
Absolutely.
And I remember when I was a lot younger, Women's Lib, which was a huge big deal for my generation. I was living in London, and Women's Lib supported the Gay Lib, and Gay Lib supported us. So we were always walking down the street side by side with our overalls on and our hiking boots, not wearing lipstick. And it's the same. We're still struggling for recognition. And so I thought it was utterly relevant today. This belief that there are things women just should not or cannot do. And in the war, there was no choice.
Right.
Those women desperately. There were ATA pilots who were men, and they called themselves the ancient and tattered airmen because either too old or pretty beat up from the First World War to fly. But they were in the minority, and it really was remarkable that White Waltham, which was the headquarters for the ATA, fought like mad to get equal pay for their women pilots, and they succeeded. But right at the end of the war, when everything was over and done with, the RAF still wouldn't take women pilots, and neither could they fly commercially. So I thought that needed to be mentioned again.
Yeah. It's interesting that it takes crises and wars and things to, like, when they have no choice, to let women be able to show what they can truly do. I mean, I came across that writing, you know, the Verity Kent series, because the intelligence there were thousands of women that worked for the intelligence agencies, and we knew nothing about them. They kept their mouths shut. But the men that were in charge talked about how, they weren't good agents because they talk, you know, and all these things. Just like, no, they don't, you know. It's like all these things.
Oh, really? Yeah. So that was I was thinking of that. I was thinking of you with your World War I series, and how, but women right across the board were doing amazing things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, just at the turn of the century, 1915, 1914. So but I just thought how could you not want to write about the ATA? And I just then thought, well, how do I turn it to my advantage and make a mystery out of it? And it wasn't difficult to come up with a couple of ideas, and that made that even more fun.
So let's talk about Poppy, because I just love her. And And she also happens to do a job that was probably done by men before the war as a scriptwriter for the Crown Film Unit. Can you talk to us about that and talk to us about the Crown Film Unit? What did they do and all that?
So the Crown Film Unit was part of the Ministry of Information. And it really churned out propaganda stuff. You know, when you went to see your double feature in the evening with your boyfriend, your new American GI boyfriend, you would sit and watch about 10 minutes of war information, you know, especially the exciting bits and the battles that were won. And, you know, going into northern India and all of that. And the Crown Film Unit made infomercials in a way. What they did was they pinpointed civilians who did remarkable things during war. And I kind of took that and really used it a lot. And I made it almost in some respects a little bit comical. Like, you know, there's an old woman who runs a sweet shop, and she knitted 150 pairs of socks for soldiers. And another young girl who made her own boat and rescued some fighter pilot who came down in the channel. And so Poppy, who lives very much in her own world, and in the first book, in Midnight Murders, is writing a book, which she sends off at the end, and unfortunately can't be published because there's a paper shortage, and that is a genuine. That's genuinely true. That's why radio came into its own, because there was a genuine paper shortage. So, but she was recruited then as an assistant scriptwriter to the Crown Film Unit, and this is her first assignment. This is the very first time she gets to go on location with Huntley and the cameraman Keith. And off they go and shoot this film of these amazing women. And then it would be used, you see, as a sort of recruiting tool. But of course, not everything goes quite as
of course,
planned as they all expect. So that's what Poppy's up to. She starts off her life, because when you got to about 18, I think it was, you had to do something for the war effort, unless you were a mother. But of course, you know, meant that you couldn't do anything else. And so you either worked in a factory, or you drove an ambulance, or you did this, or mostly women were drivers. They mostly chauffeured people. And Poppy was an air raid warden in the first book. And I mean, that's such an easy piece of cake. Of course she's going to be able to investigate murders.
I love that, though. I mean, just learning all the different things that you get to explore in that book that I didn't know. I mean, because how many books have a female air raid warden as the, you know, narrator? I mean,
but they did. Most women did. They clumped around in those terrible, God, the uniforms were dreadful, and they must have been in the winter. They were so cheaply made. I mean, the biggest thing that I think that impacted me the most, especially as we live in the land of plenty, is how short of everything they were. Soap. You know, you couldn't even launder your clothes with anything but warm water. Coal, petrol, food. Can you imagine struggling by on 2 ounces of meat a week? I mean, that's what I give my dogs every day. 2 ounces of meat. So
yeah, we're really lucky.
Oh,
right now. Yeah.
So basically, yeah, it was a good opportunity to really do the home front thing.
So I love Poppy. She is quirky. She's really clever. She's kind of a loner. You know, and she, as Americans, she kind of has that quintessential stiff upper lip Brit thing going. You know, what was your kind of inspiration behind who she is? Like, where did she come from for you? You?
Who I'd like to be, who I would like to have been when I was her age. Yeah, the stiff upper lip thing is pretty, that's that's not how the Brits are now, but it was how they were then. And actually, when I was growing up, it's how they were, especially my parents' generation. I mean, that's what Monty Python was all about. It was laughing at all those, people. They were quite formal. And I think when the Americans arrived, it was a terrible shock to them that these lively young men, right, because they were all going to be young men, were so informal and so carefree, and there was a war on. But Poppy is a boarding school girl like me, which isn't the best way of spending your adolescence. It makes you very awkward around boys. She's an orphan, and she's raised by her grandparents, which, again, they would have been Edwardian, Victorian, again, quite formal, but a couple who really care for Poppy. And she, again, they're quite well-to-do farmers, and they live in the country. Another, isolation again. So this girl isn't socially adept in any way at all. And she can be a bit of a blurter. She will come out with stuff. She goes from being awkward to blurting something she wished she hadn't said. Don't we all? And she just is that person that was not the popular girl in school. There's nothing smart about her. She's not hip. She's not trendy. She's not even remotely fashionable. And yet she has a quality to her that is obviously very attractive.
Yes, absolutely. Like, you just want to be her friend, and I love the romance that's blossoming between her and Griff. And I just love it. I mean, Griff is great. He's just dashing, and the American Airman, and, it's fun to watch them and watch her grow. And, as we know from history, there were a large number of American soldiers who ended up marrying British women. I mean, Queen Mary that brought over a whole shipload of them, for the war. And what made you want to explore that dynamic? Is it just that clash? What was so interesting to you about
the dynamic between Griff, the outgoing because he's a Californian too. He's not
right.
a coast boy. Californian, and his dad was a barnstormer. I mean, this isn't just your average nice American boy from the Midwest or the East or the preppy East Coast. This is a California boy and grew up, Irish family, probably went to America in the potato famine, worked like hell. Now they have an orange farm. Everything's nice. And Griff is, he's the son of a man who's done quite well. And he's abundantly confident. And I, went through that whole thing when I came to America, and of course fell in love with an American who always had an answer for everything and knew everything. So I sort of like that. What's his name? Bernard Shaw said, George Bernard Shaw said, America and England are two cultures separated by a common language. So that is a theme that played out. That naturally Griff was going to say stuff that they were speaking the same language, but the terminology was often very different. And she gets starchy and she corrects him. And, she can be a little put downy, but it's only because he makes her a little unsure of herself. So the dynamic between those two was fun. I mean, and it's a struggle for me to write romance.
Really?
Oh gosh, yes.
Because it just feels so natural. Like, I love it.
Well, I was like, I don't want to make this sappy. And I don't remember my agent saying to me, Tessa, how far do you go with romance into physical attraction, into sex? And Kevin, we shared the same agent. Kevin said to me, well, Tessa, it's up to you when you close the bedroom door. And I thought, oh, that's true. I am in control. But I just didn't really want to write. I was not sure about it at all. I wasn't sure that a mystery should have, now you have romance in both your series. How much romance do you think should be in a mystery? As much as you want.
Exactly. It comes down to the writer. I love it. I love it when stories have that little romance because it just adds a little something. It's like a depth to the person because we all love someone, and it's an extra crises and an extra conflict. And so I just naturally gravitate towards that. But I know other people that don't like romances in their mysteries. So it's really what the writer likes to do or what feels natural or what fits the story,
Yes, that's what I think too. I mean, male female attraction, female attraction, male attraction comes into our life, is part of our life, so it should be there.
Exactly.
But I was like, well, I'm going to do it. And I have, I've read reviews where people are like, oh God, well, we just and I'm like, well, too bad.
Just ignore them. Yeah. The rest of us are like, yes,
Yes, go on.
Well, and this is really fits perfectly, I think, for you in that sense, because, Poppy is that Brit, stiff upper lip, doesn't know how to explore her feelings. And so it fits the way you've done it is perfect. It's how they would have been. I mean, I even talk about, World War I, my series, the Verity Kent series, Verity and Sydney are much more affectionate. They're married already, but they're more loose, but they still are Brits. They're still, he's not going to say, I love you. That's just not what they did. I mean, like
he might when he's closed the bedroom door, but gonna say it in the middle of tea with his in-laws.
Yes, exactly. It's like,
right.
There's
immense reserve. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it fits.
Yes, it does.
So let's address
I don't think Americans either displayed open affection for one another at that time.
Absolutely.
I made him an outgoing, attractive and dashing, but he would have behaved very properly around her.
Right.
No
shenanigans.
Shenanigans. Yes, the word of the year. No shenanigans.
So let's address something I know everyone wants to talk about because I do. Bess, the corgi.
Should I get her for you?
She's upstairs.
Yes.
You have two corgis. So she's based on one of your corgis.
She's based on Daphne, my.
Aw. I just love her. It's so funny because you have two corgis. The queen has corgis. Corgis actually happen to be my favorite breed. What made you decide to give Poppy a dog and make it a corgi? Obviously, because you have a corgi, probably. But and what do you think Bess adds to the stories? I mean, and she has some things to show us too.
Well, she's another dimension of Poppy, in some respects, and I think dogs, our pets, are dimensions, or we project our personality onto them. I mean, I will talk to my dogs and answer for them, and so basically they really do round me out. Daphne especially, because she's a female and they're herding dogs, so female herding dogs can be quite standoffish sometimes. They're very opinionated. And Daphne has a huge opinion and she votes, and she's also very stubborn. So yes, there was a joke I had in the first draft of my book where I decided to call the dog Bess. And I told Chris, I've decided to call the dog Bess. And he was like, yeah, right, great. As in, Bess, you is my corgi now. So I was almost tempted to put that in as a grift joke, but yeah. So Daphne is very much, she's also a hero dog,
Mm-hmm.
She's very protective of of her mistress, and she's very but like all female mammals, and this is true in our house, our corgi male, whose name is Griff, is definitely a mommy's boy, and Daphne behaves like a complete idiot around my husband, and that definitely I borrowed that as the way Bess behaves towards Griff in the story, which is really how Poppy would like to be. You know, she would like to spring into his arms and cover his uniform in her hair. You know, I mean, he's really a dish, and she's terrified of letting him know that she likes him. So Bess does it for her.
Right. That's yeah. I love when animals, you can tell when an author really understands animals and how they affect us as humans, and they add that dimension, and they're just fun. I mean, I have my Earl Grey cat in the Lady Darby series, and every scene he's in, it's like he steals it because he's just fun, you know.
That is based on your little gray cat, right?
Well, we don't have a gray cat, but we have a tiger cat. But yes,
Oh.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He's kind of my cat, PETA, and my parents had a couple fat cats because Earl Grey's a fat cat at this point. The kids have been feeding him.
Yes.
But
yeah.
I mean, kind of a conglomerate of a few cats I know. You know, they're just fun. They're just fun to write, and yeah. So
they're also nice to introduce because you're really dealing with stumbling on horribly mangled and
yes.
yeah, you need a little something there to alleviate that.
Yes.
I mean,
absolutely.
The fact that we call them cozy mysteries is ludicrous when you think how awful our characters die. So it's
very true. And how many people we kill in one village, or you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad you brought up Bess because she's lovely. She's my little pup. Yeah.
I think readers adore her. So the previous book, you know, it was set in Little Buffington, that little village, and it's that colorful cast, which I adore, and her grandparents and the new neighbors, the American Airmen. But Fatal Flyers, you're in London, we're among the Atta girls, you know, so it's out of Poppy's comfort zone, you know. Tell us about that shift in location, like, you know, and the effect it had on the story. And do you enjoy getting to explore different places?
Yeah, well, she's only in London very briefly at the beginning of Fatal Flyers because she's sent off on location to Didcot, which is my fictional version of Hamble Airfield, which actually or existed then as an ATA girl thing. And yes, because what I enjoy doing is writing about England, and that's how I fill in my homesickness, because I probably will never live in England again. Every so often I threaten Chris, we should really just pack up and go and live in England. And I know it's not the England that I grew up in or visit because I have family there. I think drumming up all these fictional villages gives me my English country fix. I have no homesickness for London, and I lived in London before I came to America because it's so tremendously changed. And none of my friends live there anymore. They all moved out to the country. So yeah, that's the whole four seasons thing of England: the spring, the autumn, the weather. I can write screeds on the weather in England. That's what that's all about, really. Probably
I know. I love that.
Fine wherever she goes, you know, she's going to be who she is. You know, I can't imagine her getting into the nightclub scene in London, because London really was pretty hot during the war because everyone was having one last fling before their boyfriend went back to the front, and American airmen all made a beeline for London.
Right.
Taught all those English girls how to jitterbug. Yeah.
Very similar to World War One. It was,
Yeah.
there was rationing and all this stuff, but they were still going to clubs and restaurants and,
Yes. Yes. And you know what amazes me? People say to me, well, it's just not gritty enough. And I'm like, well, no, it wasn't gritty. They weren't in Auschwitz. They were in London at a club. And people did party. I think they party far more wildly when there's a crisis and life is uncertain.
Yeah. I'm like, where do you think Roaring Twenties came from? People say that to me about World War One, like, oh, they would have been, no. When they came back, they were like, let's forget all this and dance and drink, and I don't want to remember,
Yes, absolutely. They were all doing cocaine like mad at all their parties after the First World War.
Morphine part, they would have pajama parties and taking more, opium, and all.
Yes. No, they were terrible little druggies and partied all night. I'm always coming across that thing where, I just don't think they, they're aristocrats. They wouldn't have done that. And I'm like, oh, yes, they would.
Oh, yes.
But you're right. That there is a intensity to life when
it can end like that. When this may be the last time they see them. Yeah. Well, John, let's check in with you because I have a couple more questions, but let's see if readers have any questions.
All right. So I wanted to mention you guys were talking about romance and how some readers like it, some readers don't. We talked with Jen McKinley on Tuesday night, and because she does mysteries and she also does kind of romance as well. Mm-hmm. And she said that basically when she gets letters from readers that are like, oh, I don't like the romance in the book, usually that email ends with, okay, but you have to tell me who the character is going to end up with. So even if they say they don't like it, they really do.
Yes. They can't resist.
So Lindsay wants to know for both of you, she says she loves the characters that character names that you've both come up with. So where did the names Poppy and where did the name Verity come from? Let's start with Tessa.
My mother had my younger brother on November the 9th, which in England is Remembrance Day. And when she came out of her twilight sleep, all the nurses were wearing poppies. And she decided she was going to call the baby Poppy. And then they said it's a boy and she couldn't, obviously. Well, she could have done. But I sprung into my mind. And there was also the business that this is an orphan of World War I parents. Her father was killed during World War I. Her mother died of influenza. And so Poppy actually was quite a common name for girls of Poppy's age. And Redfern, well, why ever not? I just thought it just went very nicely with Poppy. And it just came. God knows from where.
Verity, I get asked that a lot, and I love that name. I don't really know where I saw it. I saw it somewhere, and I was just like, oh, I really like that name, and it's truth. It's what it means, and I thought how perfect for a character. And well, it's kind of funny because I think I was pregnant with my second daughter at the time, and I was like asking my husband, "Do you like Verity?" Because I thought about naming her that, and he's like, "I don't like that." And I was like, "Okay, fine, I'm gonna use it on a character." And then Kent, I don't know, it just fit. Verity Kent just flowed.
Well, that's very English. It's, Kent.
And it's, they're, respectable upper class, so it just fit. So
yes.
So Tessa, can you talk to us a little bit about then the decision to use Poppy's name in the titles for the books? Was there any point where it was potentially not going to be used and they were going to have different titles?
No, because I wrote that book, Poppy Redfern and the Midnight Murders, and that's what it was published under. Because I felt quite strongly about it. I stuck up my title. I think there was a tendency during the 30s, between the wars, when they would write adventure stories of boys and girls, where they would have so-and-so and so-and-so and the what's and under the doodle or what. Captain, I'm trying to remember his last name. I hate it when this happens to me. Captain Smith and the Sands of Time. And each one was an iteration of that. And since my father was a complete boy's own adventure reader, and we had a lot of his books hanging around our house when we were growing up. We never read them because they were really awful. I want to make it have that place and time feel to it. So, but I stupidly went Poppy Revan and the Midnight Murders, and then I had to think of another alliteration for Fatal Flyers. And now I've really painted myself into a corner, and I can't think of a title for the next one that is alliterative. And so I might do a competition. Somebody help me do that.
That's the best. Yes, do it.
Yes.
Reach out to
do
readers.
a competition.
Yeah,
So really,
I do that.
That's how they came about. It's really a borrow from the 1930s adventure stories.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's great. I mean, you hear, I mean, like Lindsay said, I mean, Poppy Redfern is such a great character name. You hear a name like that, and to me, you immediately want to know like who that person is and what adventures they're going to go on.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Names are so important in books, aren't they?
They are. Yes. Do you find, I mean, I cannot, especially a main character, I have to get the name right or I just can't.
It doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah. I came up with a wonderful name once called a woman called Marigold Merriweather. And she was a drip, she just got dressed and was beautiful. and I just thought, God, I have to bring her into another story because that kind of woman, they're flawlessly attractive. They never look harassed or sweaty, and they always have nothing to say. And I thought, I've got to get that Marigold Merriweather into another book. But yeah, I love Verity Kent. That's spot on for an English girl.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it works. It just fits her.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love when you get a name right, you're just like, yeah, yes, I don't know.
Yay.
Yeah.
And so, Anna, can you tell us a little bit about the Verity Kent series for anybody who's watching who might not know about them?
Sure, yeah. So the Verity Kent series is set in 1919, just after about 6 months. It opens just about 6 months after the end of, the armistice of World War I. And Verity was a Secret Service, an intelligence agent during the war. And I explore a lot of that because there were thousands of women who worked for the British intelligence, whether in London and the various agencies or, in the field in the German occupied areas doing spying, intelligence gathering. And she, in the first book, she's drawn into to a house party because someone has accused her husband, who she believes is dead, of treason. And so she's called she goes in to investigate because she wants to prove his innocence, and kind of spirals from there. And it's kind of mysteries that have carried over from the war and also new mysteries, murder mysteries and things. And she has her own little nemesis now, a Moriarty-like figure that she's contending with. So, which was a lot of fun because I don't have a Moriarty, like an arch nemesis in the Lady Derby series. So I wanted to do something different, and it's just perfect with the war, and she's a spy, and so it's been a lot of fun.
So her past comes back to haunt her.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, over and over. And I mean, these women, they did amazing things, and then they were criticized for them and told them that they really couldn't do that job, but they did. Oh, you got that information, then you must have slept with someone.
Yes.
I mean, it was very, sexist, like it was awful. Yeah. So.
But it was awful.
It was. Yeah, it was. But she has a lot of fellow agent friends that help out, a code breaker, somebody who worked in counterintelligence, a fellow spy. And a lot of these came from memoirs that I read of actual spies, and just fascinating information, and the people who ran the spy networks within the resistance networks and all that. So it's a lot of real anecdotes like Tessa and I were talking about, or real characters. I mean, I have a character who was inserted into the German army years before the war. And he was a British intelligence agent that was in the German army as an officer. So, real characters anyway.
Yeah, having real historical characters anchor your history so wonderfully.
They do.
And then your fictional characters can be nice and relatable to people today. And as you said earlier, the thing that amazes me when you dig into some of these memoirs about things people did in those wars is you can't believe that you know that if you were to tell that it as it happened, people would.
That's not true. Yeah.
So going with that, so how do you balance that? How do you find those kind of really cool historical anecdotes where the people are potentially not going to believe them? So how do you balance being able to tell a story like that, but also still making it so people would potentially believe it had happened?
I don't know. I think if something is real to you, and you're genuinely impressed by something remarkable someone's done, it's going to come through. I mean, I found that with the ATA girls that first of all, I was in awe of them because I could never have done what they did. It just isn't remotely possible that I could get into a tiny little plane and find my way up to Scotland in it. In appalling weather with no radio, no compass or whatever. And I think if you're that impressed and that amazed by someone's courage and strength of character, that just comes through.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think a lot of it's that, and it's the context you give behind the characters and who they are. It's almost like you have to work yourself up to it and frame it so it fits. Yeah, and it's nice when you get to include historical notes at the end too, to say this is not true, so this is what I fudged.
I fooled you, it's not true. But the other thing that's great about writing historical anything is that you use what really, really happened as a backdrop to your and your characters' lives. And then they do things that ordinary people would have done, like what did they eat for breakfast? What would she put on when she got dressed to go to work? All those things, if you research them carefully enough, just add that another layer of the world you've created. And that's, I think, what it is. You're just adding layers to a world that you create. I couldn't imagine not writing anything that wasn't historical. I couldn't begin to write a thriller set today. Could you, Anna?
I every once in a while
Have you thought of writing contemporary mysteries?
I've thought about writing like a dual time period one that's one part's contemporary. I've never really come up with a story. They're always in the past or or an alternative reality kind of thing. I don't know. It's what I'm drawn to. It's what I think about. It's like just where my creativity goes. And I think that if I wrote contemporary, I would have trouble with getting the language right because I'm so used to writing past. Do you know what I mean? Like there's that formal dialogue. There's different, And so I think if I tried to write contemporary, I would have so much trouble.
You just have to curse a lot. Just curse and it'll all be fine.
But, I mean, yeah.
I don't know. It's bad enough having to live in this world, right? I don't mean it really that way. But, dealing with events.
Yes. It's kind of an escape.
Yes, I've got to escape. I think that's what it's all about anyway.
Yeah. It's that comfort of we got through that. We'll get through this. You know what I mean? It's that feeling. So
it does. Were you a history buff at school? Was that something you loved?
I loved history. It was my favorite, other than music. It was music and history were my two things. And I decided to go the music route with college, and then after college switched to writing. But, I always have been interested in history. I think it's in my blood a little bit because my grandfather loved history and I have brothers who love history. I mean, it's just kind of, I don't know. Yeah. I just find it fascinating.
Yeah. It's the water you swam in growing up.
Yes.
I used to daydream through all my classes except for English literature and history. And those are the only ones that I was actually present in. The rest was like daydreaming.
Yes.
So when you guys are reading for pleasure, do you tend to read historical fiction? Do you read contemporary, all over the place? And what is something that you have read recently that you loved? Let's start with Tessa.
I'm terrible. I never read mysteries. If I do, I know, isn't it dreadful? I read Dorothy Sayers. I read the old, what did they call, the old golden age writers. Yeah, and I love them. And I will reread those. It's about plot. It's about place and time. What have I just finished reading? I just finished doing a reread, and it's a comfort reread, and it's a book by Nancy Mitford, who wrote Between the Wars. And she wrote two books. One was called The Pursuit of Love, and the other one was called Love in a Cold Climate. And I laugh all the way through because they're very wicked. She's very good at characters, and her characters are very tricky and very full, in the fullest sense of the English eccentric. And that goes for the women too. It's not just interesting male eccentrics. They're all women. And she has she's wicked. There's a wickedness, but she's always inviting you to, she'll set up a situation and then we'll all have a good laugh about it together. And that's what I'm just on the last pages and thinking, what am I going to read after this?
Yeah, I am. So I just turned in Verity Cat Book 5 on Tuesday.
So you don't want to read anything.
Well, pretty much the last month I got nothing done but writing. So I was trying to think back. What did I finish? What was the last thing I finished? And it's funny. I think the last thing I read was Death on the Nile because the movie was coming out, and I was like, I can't remember all this. Agatha Christie. Let me think. I read Karen Hawkins' The Book Charmer. That's contemporary. It's more like magical realism. I loved that. I read that like a month or two ago. I do read mostly historical and mostly mysteries, honestly. And I read a lot of historical romance, but I do kind of read other things too. I guess it's kind of what strikes my fancy. So, yeah. So
good for you. I love Sherlock Holmes. I love that whole fact that he never actually, with Sherlock Holmes, he actually tells you how it all happened in a very sort of snotty and superior way. And I'm a perfect Watson. I just go, oh, yeah, that's great. Well done. Brilliant. And I never, ever, ever say to myself during a Sherlock Holmes, who do I think did it? Because I know that it will be wrong and that I will be put right in the end. So I kind of like that about him.
Earlier this year, I read a book called The Angel of the Crows, which is a fantasy novel that supposes that Sherlock Holmes is an angel and Watson is a hellhound or a werewolf or something. But it was the perfect. And so since he's an angel, he sort of kind of lives in our world, but is disconnected from our world.
Yeah.
And it really kind of perfectly explained how he could look at something and know everything about a situation and be kind of, like you said, so snotty about the resolution. It was a really fascinating twist on kind of the Sherlock Holmes pastiches. That was a really early quarantine read for me. That was really fun.
I love that. I have to look that up.
What do you think Conan Doyle would make of all these iterations of his character? Laurie King,
right,
beekeeper thing, and that amazing series on TV they did with
Benedict Cumberbatch. Yes,
Dishy Cumberbatch,
tons of them.
Where he writes, all his thoughts down on a screen in front of you. I just love the whole of that. I mean, there's so many iterations of.
I think all of us are fascinated too, obviously, because we're just consuming all these. It's not like we haven't got sick of them yet. So.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy that, we have kind of the Conan Doyles on the shelf at the bookstore, and then we have kind of all of the pastiches and stuff are on the shelf with them. So if you're looking for Conan Doyle, you can find all that stuff. And it's really funny that we have 2 or 3 volumes that are the complete short stories, the complete novels, and then another shelf and a half of stuff that are other people's takes on it. It's interesting.
And do people sort of push past Conan Doyle and go, no, I don't want to read that. I want to read, or do people still read Conan Doyle?
They do. It tends to be, I think, kind of more people coming in and picking them up for kind of like grandkids or kids that haven't been exposed to them yet. But
Right.
I think that kind of those Sherlock Holmes stories are things that people, or some of the first mysteries that we read kind of after we're done with kind of Nancy Drew and the first kind of adult mystery stuff that people read. So, a lot of people have read them already, and once in a while people will come back and are like, hey, I just want to dive back into this world. But I think that people, and I love the Doyles too, but a lot of that language can sometimes be kind of dense and old if you're kind of not in the mood for that. So I think people kind of like the contemporary takes on it because they're a little bit more accessible if you don't necessarily have kind of the brain power to dig into that kind of 1800s prose.
Yeah, and it's more, and the iterations are more relatable too, I suppose.
Yeah. So we've got a couple more minutes. So before we head out, Tessa, I know that you just had the new book come out Tuesday, but can you tell us what you have coming out next?
Yes, I got to think up something for Poppy, and I have an idea, but I have two other things that I recently sold to Berkeley. And one of them is a book about Queen Elizabeth when she was Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret Rose's governess. Her name was Marion Crawford, and they called her Crawfie, of course. And it's a fascinating story that my mother told me when I was about 14 or 15, about what had happened to this governess. And so I wrote the story of Crawfie, who spent 16 years looking after those girls through the war and out the other end, and supported Princess Elizabeth with amazing selflessness when she wanted to marry Philip, as they call him on the crown, which I love. So it's kind of like a precursor to the crown. And so that comes out in June, and that's historical. It's not a mystery. There's no murders. Everybody survives. So that comes out in June. And then I recently sold another historical fiction, which is about an English haute couture designer in Edwardian England who opened fashion houses in London, New York, Chicago, and Paris. And she was an Englishwoman. And she was abandoned by her husband for a music hall dancer. He ran off and left her penniless. And the only thing she knew how to do was make clothes for her dolls. That's what she'd done. And she became, I saw an exhibition of her stuff at the Victoria and Albert in London, and the most exquisite clothes. I mean, superbly made, of course, but also the design, the colors and everything. So so it's a sort of love story. And she also survived the sinking of the Titanic.
Wow.
On one of her trips back and forth, right? London to New York. And that's what's for me. What about you? What are you up to these days? You just turned in your...
Yes. Okay, so next out is Lady Darby book 9, which is out April, I think it's 7th. And it's called A Wicked Conceit. And Kira and Gage are headed back to Edinburgh. And Bonnie Brock Kincaid is causing some more trouble for them, the head of that Edinburgh gang. And it's funny because it's based on a lot of real history that I got to kind of weave in and manipulate a little bit. So that was a lot of fun. And readers keep asking because Kira is very, very pregnant at this point. So there will be a conclusion to that as well. So lots going on in that book. And then my next Verity Kent book 5, which I just finished, Murder Most Fair, is out next September or October. I don't know the pub date yet. But also Verity will be finally confronting her family and dealing with some things that she's not dealt with since the war, that she put on hold. And yeah, so which was interesting to write, especially at this time period when we're all quarantined and so we're pretty self-isolated anyway. So yeah, so both of those next year. So
I can't believe that you're on book 9.
I know, isn't that crazy? I'm
You
like,
know-
now I got to come up with an idea for number 10.
You know, Anna and I have run interesting parallels. When we share the same agent. And when I signed with Kevin, you had just sold, The Anatomist's Wife had just come out.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Hanging off the shelves. And Kevin said, because I didn't know anything about publishing. And I was like, so who do you represent? And she told me about you. And I believe that was so long ago now.
I know. I'm almost like,
I think to myself, well, there
it's been 8 years, I think now. It's been 8 years since that came out. So it just seems like next year will be book 16 and 17. And I'm just like, how? Anyway.
And how you write two series, I don't know. I don't know how you do that. Two little girls writes 2 series. I had to wait until all my girls left home before I could even begin to think that I had the right.
I'm a horrible procrastinator.
Myself to writing a book. I thought, how does she do it?
So the busier I am, the more I get done because I don't have time to procrastinate. It's an odd, I don't know. It works in my brain. It's like I have to have a happy medium. So.
Well, congratulations.
Oh, thanks.
I'm impressed. I think it's what I say to you whenever I come across you. How do you do it? Yeah. So.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. If you guys have been watching online and if you tuned in late, we have been talking with Tessa Arlen, whose newest book, Poppy Redfern and the Fatal Flyers, has just come out. And we've been chatting with Annalee Huber, whose most recent release is A Pretty Deceit, which is the newest in her Verity Kent series. If you came in late and missed the first part of the chat, you'll be able to catch the rest of it on YouTube once we have finished. I wanted to mention real briefly, we have books by both authors in the store. Murder by the Book is now open for people to come in and browse. We're limiting the number of people in store at a time. So we've been telling people if you pull up and the parking lot's full, maybe just poke your head in and say, hey, are you guys full? If we are, we'll just ask you to wait a few minutes and get somebody in. But we also understand not everybody is willing to come in. So if you don't want to come into the store, we're still offering curbside pickup. We're still doing mail orders as we get closer to Christmas. Remember, the post office is experiencing some delays. So we definitely recommend if you're going to do mail order, you get those orders in sooner rather than later. Also wanted to send out a huge thank you to Brittany at Berkeley for helping us put all of this together. And again, a big thanks to Anna for chatting with Tessa. And Tessa, like I said before, it is really great to actually finally get to meet you face to face after interacting with you online for so long. So thank you both so much. Happy holidays.
Thank you.
And
happy
we will
holidays.
See y'all soon. Take care.